Hi everybody. As promised, I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview of some of the things to look for as you workshop each other's essays, and as well some of the strategies you might use to revise, pointing to some of the specific pages in your textbook, which I think you'll find especially useful as you begin to revise this profile essay. As you workshop each other's drafts, the thing to focus on really is how well has this profile come together in terms of serving a frame. I've talked a lot about frame as we pulled this together. That notion of a frame is really central to any kind of writing, especially academic writing. Whenever someone reads something you've written, they are always going to ask why. Why was this written? What's the purpose? The frame for the profile is what the reason for this person being chosen, what this person has to say, and there's a list here on the right of the slide about some of the things that the person's life might comment on or reveal more about. How does this person represent a group? Or maybe trying to share something about a group. How does this person represent an idea, a public event, a point of view, whatever? Some frame has to exist there. So I want you to look out for that. And one thing to look out for as you're reading, once you've identified the frame, does the content support the frame, or are there bits and pieces that don't seem to? For example, one of the things that I've recommended people do as they write in order to get details, in order to pull things together to really paint a picture for readers, is describe the subject of the profile. But how you describe that person really should reflect, to some extent, the frame as well. Telling us a lot of irrelevant details might not actually help your case or help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. Content, the content grade on these essays and content in general in writing, yes, you want to have sufficient stuff in the essay, but it's also possible to have too much stuff, especially if you've included things that don't clearly support your purpose in writing. So as you read each other's drafts, that's the key thing. Look for the frame. And then once you've identified the frame, does the draft make those connections clearly throughout? So here the purpose and the meaning on this slide, you can see again in the slide share presentation as well, is outlining the sorts of things to look for in general terms as you're reviewing each other's drafts. In terms of organizing this essay, as you begin revising, this slide is actually pulling from an article we didn't read. You're welcome to read it if you'd like to look back at this. But what I want to talk about is how the content is organized, because for this essay you've got a lot of different stuff coming together. I suggested you use anecdotes. I suggested you use interviews and sometimes direct quotes, sometimes information paraphrased from those interviews. And then your own interpretation, your own understanding. So this kind of maps out how you can alternate those sorts of things. And one thing to notice is how it begins with a scene. One thing you want to do whenever you write is hook readers in. And I use that word hook on a lot of your drafts. You want to get readers interested in reading on. Immersing them in a scene to begin with is often a very effective way of doing that. Then you can back up, give some of the background they're going to need, and then weave in the rest of your content. So the structure of this essay, and it's not a pattern you have to follow, scene, some background information, the scene, which will again get readers engaged again. Anytime you back out and start telling us background, you run the risk of boring your readers. So scene, very interesting, you back up a little bit and give some background, then you do something to re-engage your readers again. And here there's a scene and dialogue, those two kind of work together. Description of something happening in the conversation that happens. Again, this shows readers what's going on at that moment of the story. You're telling it in a very visceral way. It gives them a direct experience. Quotation, again, if you use a quote, it has to be engaging, interesting. It has to be clear why the quote is there. And then finally, the comment at the end. This is where you can begin to draw out the frame. You just want to not be preachy in drawing out the frame, but reflect on what that frame meant to you. Once we get down to revising, after the workshop is done, and I will give you a few comments as well on each of the drafts, so you'll have my feedback plus your peers' feedback, once you're ready to start working again, here are some of the broad areas you need to look at as you revise, and then some specific suggestions on the next slide for resources in your text that will help you. First of all, as you're looking at the stuff in the essay, back up and ask yourself if the information has been grouped logically. And the last slide shows you what the author here means by categories. Is it just clear why stuff comes where it does? You should be able to tell me why everything comes in the essay where it does. Then you need to use transitions, connections for your readers to make sure they see why things come where they do. If you're not sure, then you want to step back and maybe outline. When I say outline, I don't mean a Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, that sort of thing. I actually just mean a list of your main ideas in the order in which they come. Sometimes looking at that will raise questions about why things come as they do, and then you can begin shuffling things around. Okay, and then we're getting down to the Frankenstein draft. Is really what you should view your draft once it's done as a rough draft, as something that might completely change before the final draft comes in. And I know you've got relatively limited turnaround time for your revisions, but if you even manage to pull things and reorganize them so that the logic is clear to you and working in a few transitions there, that will have a significant impact on the final grade and the final effectiveness of that essay. And then your revision, you may actually need to, what your author calls go back into the ocean from the mountain. You might have to dip back in. Here they're suggesting research. If there are gaps in your knowledge, you may have to get more information. Or if there are just gaps in the frame, for example, you don't think the connection's as good as you want it to be, you do have to be aware that even at this final stage, you may have to do some of those invention strategies again, or at least do some research. The drafts, the final essays that come in that are essentially like the drafts with minor changes tend to be the final essays that get the poorest grades. The draft is really an opportunity to get your stuff on paper. The real writing comes in the revision. That's when you polish it and make it worthwhile. Here are some very common problems in these drafts. The frame isn't clear, or it might even need to be refined, narrowed, focused more. Both are important. Refining, in other words, the frame isn't quite where it has to be, period. You have to think about it more. Or clarifying, it's there, but it might not be clear to the readers. There's not enough stuff for the frame to work, and that's where you might have to go back, speak to your interviewee, maybe conduct another interview, do some more background research to make sure you've got the content. Or if your interviewee told you a story that you haven't included, you could write that scene and build in anecdotes that further clarify what you are trying to say. And the other thing is, you want to make sure that your voice does not always dominate this essay. In other words, the profile works because it gives readers a really insightful glimpse into the subject of the profile. If you are constantly throwing yourself into the text, especially if you're telling us what to think, explaining things to us too much, then you're going to lose your readers, and you lose the impact of having that profile subject as the heart of the essay. Okay, so, and I've said this again and again, and you'll be sick of it from me, this course, and probably from every writing teacher you'll ever have. You show, you don't tell. You show, you don't tell. You show, you don't tell. If you show effectively enough, you might not have to summarize or interpret for your readers at all. Even if you do feel you still have to tell us, okay, this is what this scene meant, if you've shown the scene authentically, and that telling can be very concise, and really just make sure readers are with you, you should not spend most of your essay explaining things to us. This final slide then is great because, and we did this with the last essay as well. You've got a number of potential problems in your draft and suggestions from that chapter 13, which you read a few weeks ago, that will help you address those specifically. And I won't go over these in detail, but I would refer back to this slide once you've gone over the comments you've gotten back on your essay, once you've had a chance to reread it after having read a few other people's essays. Take a look at this and tackle these revision strategies. They will help you pull this essay together as completely and effectively as you can.